I have not dated people with any sort of like consideration of like what my dating will be like representatively. Hey, what's up, y'all? This is Jacob. Welcome back to Sunday Yap Session, the show where every Sunday I hop on here and yap at you all about something with some sort of cohesive through line to carry us all through, and sometimes we do better than others. If you enjoyed today's video, please be sure to give it a like because that helps me out quite a bit. And if you want to come yap with me every single Sunday, be sure to hit that subscribe button because I upload at least once a week and sometimes more. Strawberry aguas frescas today. This is from Minute Maid, so like how authentic is it really? But oh, I forgot to shake it before I drink it. Hopefully it isn't bad. Usually this is the part where I would say I know exactly what I want to talk about this week. I know what I want to talk about. I don't want to talk about it necessarily, but this has been the discourse of a week, so let's just get into it. So lately online, as the discourse cycle tends to do, cycling through its handful of topics, the topic of this week is interracial dating, which largely I find annoying to talk about because I feel like a lot of the conversations that are started are not really done in good faith. But since this seems to be the discourse of the week and I am someone who has a lot of experience with interracial dating, all of my relationships have been interracial, I feel as I have some level of interest in talking about this. Mostly I want to clear my name because sometimes I get a little bit of smoke and a little bit of like criticism for being someone who dates interracially, and I largely don't really have any problems or issues with it. And I kind of want to discuss that today. I also want to discuss like my own journey with like unlearning anti-blackness and kind of talking about the ways in which whiteness is put on a pedestal as far as like romance and attraction and desirability and all of that. There's a lot I want to talk about today. We'll see how far I get into all of this because I think this is a large conversation. I also want to give a disclaimer too. Like, I am totally cool and fine if you want to disagree with me, if you want to have a conversation in the comments, totally down for it. But let's be respectful and remember, like, I am another human being. I think largely I find a lot of these conversations annoying too because it ends up being dehumanizing, and rather than like having any sort of interest in hearing about these perspectives of people, it is,
well, you're an anti-black person who like is fiending for white people and is wrapped up in white supremacy and and I'm like,
no, I'm just a person with like thoughts and feelings and lived experiences. So like keep it cute in the comments, but like if you want to like have a conversation, more than happy to do so. But let's just go ahead and jump into it. For starters, I think this conversation around interracial dating really is like a handful of like proximity conversations. They get looped into this, and I think interracial dating kind of gets made to be like the source of a lot of these other issues, because I think you have like interracial dating as its nucleus, and then you have like anti-blackness attached to that. You have like desirability politics attached to that. You have like the politics of representation and the need of representation for Black love. And I think those are largely the big three. And the kind of discourse that sparked this recently was talking about like revolutionary thought leaders and people in like kind of these like spaces that have been very liberatory for Black people, and talking about how a lot of the people in these spaces have ended up either at some point or another, or for large portions of their life, dating white people or dating non-Black people. And I find this conversation very interesting because I've noticed, and a lot of people that have kind of talked about this on TikTok, I'll link a few below, such as Francesca Ramsey, who was talking about this quite a bit. I think a lot of these conversations get specifically targeted at Black women and Black queer people. And I find that very interesting because statistically, a lot of the data we have suggests that Black men are twice as likely to marry interracially as Black women. And yet Black women and Black queer people tend to be the ones that get brought up a lot in these conversations. And I think largely too, interracial dating is a lot of times conflated with anti-Blackness, and it's kind of assumed that people that aren't dating other Black people are somehow anti-Black. And I think like anti-Blackness is an element to it for people more or less. I think all of us, regardless of like who you're dating, do have some level of internalized anti-Blackness, and I think we're all at various stages of unlearning that, especially tied with white supremacy and like white people being seen as like the peak of desirability in a lot of like our media and things like that. I do find that part annoying though too, because I feel like a lot of the people that are like interracially dating or do put white people on a pedestal or see whiteness as like the peak of desirability are not subtle about it. Like, I think specifically like media figures and a lot of like music and entertainment we listen to, the people that want white women and think that white women are better than Black women, or just not specifically women, but I feel like a lot of this is seen through like a heteronormative lens. I feel like they're very like talkative about it. Like, I'm a big hip hop head, so I think about this in hip hop terms a lot. Like, the people that want white women in hip hop, you will hear them talk about it over and over and over again. And so that's part of the reason why I kind of find this conversation annoying too, because I feel like myself and other people that are interracially dating who have deconstructed their internalized anti-Blackness and do not put white people on a pedestal are kind of like catching strays for the people that are very overtly like prioritizing whiteness. And I think lastly, this conversation ends up being annoying to me because I think a lot of people that want to have these conversations do not take proximity into account at all, like proximity to other Black people. And that's where I want to kind of jump into my background background and my upbringing and kind of talk about some of the factors I feel in my life have kind of led me to the place I am, where all of my relationships have been interracial. So I was someone who grew up and was raised in the vast majority of my life in the rural suburbs of Oklahoma. And also on top of that, I am a transracial adoptee. So pretty much all of my lived experiences are with white people. My parents are white, my siblings are white, all the people I went to school for the most part were white. I can pretty much count on my hands the number of black people I knew, probably on like one hand, because there were very, very, very few of us. And because of that, especially because of like my family upbringing, all of my other family members being white, loving white people has never been weird for me. I have never really like had any sort of perception that that is odd or that is like not something I should be doing. If I can find the statistics, I'll put on screen how many black people statistically were in my town when I grew up. It's definitely like less than 5%, probably like closer to 2 or 3. And so as a result, I think I've definitely had some like experiences of like racism or like being viewed as like a white person in a black person's body. I think especially because I am like raised in a white family as well. I think a lot of the way I am perceived, and I think for quite a while, like the way I perceived myself was like somewhere like the intersection of like black and white. And we'll talk about this a little bit more when I'm talking about like deconstructing anti-blackness. But yeah, not only was I like surrounded by white people, I think like a lot of people did not view me as black really either. Like obviously physically they did, but I think especially like being in like a rural, conservative community, I think a lot of times I was also viewed as like one of the good ones, quote unquote, and that was something that I like unfortunately internalized and like had to do some work to unlearn. But largely growing up for the vast majority of my life, I just really unfortunately did not have any access to black people, especially as like a queer person. On top of that, I definitely did not really have any access to like black queer people. I think when I was in school, there was one other person who was black and who was gay. He ended up in prison. So we didn't end up being very close. But that's a story for another time. And it wasn't really even until I went to college where I was having any sort of like profound close relationships with black people for the most part, which is unfortunate. And that was something I wanted when I was younger. Like I definitely would have loved to have more black friends. I would have loved to have more black community. I think that would have helped me like make a lot more sense of like my life and my experiences and how I've moved through the world, because I'm definitely someone who has like reflected on my past and like thought about some interactions I've had and realizing that a lot of them did have a lot more like racial coding and underlying racism than I realized. And a lot of that is just because I've had to learn and be very proactive about finding black community as an adult now that I actually have like access and proximity to that. But also in college too, the college I went to was founded for and is primarily known for like agriculture and things like that. So like even when I was in college, there was like a handful more black people that I was in, and there were like some black student organizations and stuff I was in, but there like also just like was not a ton of black people either. And so I think that sort of upbringing and that kind of context, that lack of access to black people, about being around black people, and not even like getting to black people that are like me, just black people, like a period, point blank period, any of them. With that context in mind, I don't think it's really surprising that I found myself dating interracially, largely because that's all I've had access to. If I had access to more black people, I probably would have been dating more black people. I just truly did not have any access to black people that I was really interested in up until like maybe like midway through college. And throughout the end of high school and throughout pretty much my entire college experience, I was in a committed relationship. And like I said in the past, we're not gonna get into that. That's messy drama and I don't want to talk about it. And something I've seen mentioned too, especially by like Francesca Ramsey, Kat Black was talking about this as well, and I'll link both of their videos where they're talking about this. I think growing up in that context, especially when I was getting into like college, being more of an adult, kind of having more of like an active perception of being black and my blackness and what that means, and kind of deconstructing my anti-blackness that I've kind of been just like raised with being in like a mostly white society. There are a lot of feelings I had, and to some degree still do. This is something I have been working on. I've had a lot of growth on. I think being raised in that context does kind of make me feel sometimes like not black enough. And I'm not talking about this in like the I'm like too black for the white kids and too white for the black kids sort of context. Like I unlearned and kind of ridded myself of that kind of cringy mindset in like high school. But I think I more so mean just like the lack of cultural experiences and the lack of black experiences, which I unfortunately didn't really get a lot of even just like pure exposure to until I was like in like late middle school. Basically when I got like unfettered internet access and I was able to kind of see more people. Maybe someday we'll talk about like the internet, because I have so much beef and annoyance with the internet, but especially as a queer black person, the internet has been basically so essential for me finding other people like me. And without that, I feel like I would still largely be isolated from a lot of the communities that I'm active in now. But yeah, I think being raised in a predominantly white community and being in proximity, having close relationships with primarily white people, I think there is this sort of kind of insecurity that comes with that. Even like the way that I talked, or like the lack of knowing certain references or things like that. I think there was a fear that I felt, and I think a lot of people in my situation have felt, of worried that like I'm gonna be kind of like clocked. As someone who was raised in a community that there aren't a lot of black people, a lot of my perceptions of black people until I was in community with more black people was through like media, like movies, TV shows, music, so on and so forth. And I think because of that, there are kind of stereotypes that are built. And not that I viewed black people as like some sort of monolith, but I just like see things, would read things, so on and so forth, and kind of have like this larger picture of, I guess, like the black diaspora. And being someone who didn't have a lot of those experiences, I think some of that was kind of intimidating. There was a feeling that if I was like seeking community with black people, they were gonna recognize that I was not like a black person who had come up and lived a similar life experience as they had. And there was like some insecurity about that. I think largely because sometimes too it ends up being embarrassing. I'll give you an example because this happened on TikTok. In the moment, I was like, oh no. Afterwards, I've kind of am able to laugh at this and think it was funny. I remember there was this TikTok I uploaded, I think a year ago, and I was talking about the artist Khalees. I can't even remember like what the context of me talking about her was, but I referred to her as Kellis. I had never heard her name actually spoken before. I mostly just heard Milkshake and like a couple other songs. And the number of black people that jumped in the comments of that video and were like, who? Like, we're gonna take your black card away, stuff like that. I think ultimately, yes, it's like silly jokes and ha ha ha. And like, I look at it now and I'm like, oh, this is really funny. But I think it's kind of stuff like that. There are like moments where like, because of the way I've raised and the upbringing I have, I will like do things or say things or like perform in a way that like makes it very obvious that I was not raised in a black community predominantly. And it's like very exposing. It feels very like vulnerable and very like awkward sometimes and leads to like some of these embarrassing moments. And like I kind of talked about, like that isn't really like so much of a big deal anymore, largely because I've put a lot of time invested in like unlearning my anti-blackness and like just understanding ultimately that there is no one black experience. Just because I was raised in a predominantly white community does not mean I'm like not black enough. Just because I may not have like certain cultural touch points and things like that doesn't mean I'm not a black person. And basically just getting over myself and realizing that like black community is not a monolith. And so I think that kind of stuff sort of informs some of my experiences. And then kind of going back to like that upbringing and just talking about purely more of an attraction thing, similarly to kind of what I talked about before, I think it is not that difficult of a comprehension or difficult of a leap to understand that like as someone who was raised predominantly in a white space, of course I find white people attractive. And I think this ends up like being assumed that because I find white people attractive, I do not find black people attractive. That has never been the case. I have never like thought that black people were ugly. I have never not been attracted to black people, or even that I thought that like I was going to get anything from dating white people. For the people that do like fetishize whiteness and put whiteness on a pedestal, I think that being with a white person is viewed as like a sort of status symbol, specifically in like heterosexual dynamics. I think there are some people that are very colorist and think that like white women are better than black women, and like stereotype black women as like angry and argumentative and like and like dating white women is like easier sort of thing. That is something like I've never really thought or experienced and have had like any sort of experience with. I think a lot of like the anti-blackness I had and a lot of the stuff I've had to work was more so kind of like breaking down the assumption that like I need to make my experiences make sense in like a larger black context, and shifting towards just accepting like this is just the black life that I have. And that's not to say that like white supremacy and sort of like the stereotypes around whiteness being like the quote unquote peak of attractability, like not to say that I'm like completely detached from that. I think we are all like wrapped up in these systems on some level, either consciously or subconsciously. So like maybe there's a little piece of that somewhere that I'm just like not thinking about, but that has like never really been like a thought in any of my like active dating choices. I have never sought out any of my partners specifically because they were white, and I feel like viewing your partner's race as some sort of status symbol is like just odd. I don't know why people are like fiending for white people like that. And I think most of my friends I know that are interracially dating have not done that either. I think the last point I want to tackle too is how I think that some of these conversations are kind of conflated with like representation, and I think I find that a little bit weird too. I think like representation, especially of black love in the media, because that's not represented nearly enough, is very important. I think it's important that we're seeing that in all types of media. I do think though that that kind of analysis and that desire for representation in media is tacked on to like individuals. And I think especially individuals that are not in media, that feels very weird. In the same way I talked about I'm not dating people specifically that because they are white or like because they are whatever race, whatever. I've not only dated white people. I have not dated people with any sort of like consideration of like what my dating will be like representatively. I don't date because I want my relationship to be like representation to anybody. So my camera died at this point, so I want to wrap up this point. The rest of the video is filmed in the studio like it normally is. I think basically the point I was trying to get at was that representation analysis needs to be stuck just to media. I don't think it's a really fair expectation, and if we're being honest, I don't think most people are dating and thinking about like what their relationship will look like from a representation standpoint. I don't think most people have signed up for that, and I don't think that it's fair to like obligate people to do that. And I think if you applied that analysis to anything else, that wouldn't really be like a sensical argument, because just like we need more representation of Black love, we need more representation of people dating of different body types. We need people dating of people with different abilities. We need people dating with different levels of conventionally attractiveness. We need all of that portrayed in the media. So if we're gonna say that like Black people dating non-Black people is bad representation, I think that like so many of our relationships are not quote unquote good representation. And I don't think it makes sense to obligate people to be like representation for like the people around them. That is an analysis that is pretty much just for media, for stories that are crafted, that we do need to question like what are the motivations for crafting these narratives? Who are the people that are pushing these certain narratives forward? So if we're talking about these things on like a societal level or a media level, like yes, let's like analyze that and let's question that. And I think we should be doing that. I think we can question people's individual preferences and what they're gravitating towards and things like that. But analyzing it from like you being a source of representation does not make sense. I think the last point I want to talk about, and specifically why I think these conversations end up just being annoying, especially in context of a queer relationship. I think a lot of these conversations about like interracial dating and why people don't like interracial dating kind of end up being conversations about, you know, building Black families and wanting to have Black generational wealth and kind of building a Black legacy through your family and things like that, which I think are all great things. I am totally like on board with that, and I think that's wonderful and beautiful. For me though, I have no desire or plans to have children. I do not want children. I will never have children. I don't want children. So there is no generational wealth that is going to be built. Like once I am gone, it's going to be the end of it. And honestly, like my boyfriend is older than me and I'm planning to lock that in for life. I hopefully will not be dating anybody else in the future. I want this to last forever. He's a couple years older than me, so statistically, he will probably die before I do. So if anything, there is going to be white wealth transferred into my Black pockets. I think my legacy on this earth is largely just going to be through the impact I've had on the world, the content that I make, and kind of just like the stuff I do, and just working my best to be a good person. And a large part of that work is going to be very, very pro-Black and investing in Black people and investing in Black communities and Black businesses. And I think that has so much more weight and so much more importance than like who I am dating. I feel like I do enough work and do enough like contributions to the community and things like that. Who I am dating is not going to change any of that. And I don't think me dating another Black person like suddenly makes me like more pro-Black. I think my actions and impact are much more important than that. So yeah, that's pretty much it. And I would love to hear what you all think below, especially if you are someone who is Black or non-white and is interracially dating. I would love to hear your thoughts about this below. Or if you're just not and you have like opposing opinions or just want to talk about this, I would love to chat about it below. If you enjoyed today's video, please be sure to give it a like because that helps me out quite a bit. And if you want to come yap with me every single Sunday, be sure to hit that subscribe button because I upload at least once a week and sometimes more. I will catch you all in the next episode and see ya.